Hello everyone, today we go to the Balkans, a region known for its war and instability. And today we look at the unknown conflict that formally ended a decade of brutal wars in former Yugoslavia. So let us travel to Macedonia, the most underlooked country in the Balkans, and let us dive deep to understand the brutal ethnic war that shook the country to its core. As always, let us start with the ethnic and historical background. Macedonia comprises two main ethnic groups, which are going to be the focus of this video. Those groups are the Albanians, which live in the northwest of Macedonia. They make up a little over 22% of the population and are majority Muslim. And then there are the Macedonians, which are an ethnic Slavic people that live everywhere else within Macedonia and are a majority Orthodox Christian. These two groups never had any major problems till 1981, so let us start there. In 1981, Macedonia was a part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia as one of its 6 socialist republics. In the northwest, it borders the majority Albanian Socialist Autonomous Province of Kosovo, and so starting in March 1981, protests in the capital of Kosovo started. These protests demanded that Kosovo should get full republic status, and some demanded that the Albanian regions in Macedonia should be added onto the territory of Kosovo, specifically around the city of Tetovo. The protest was crushed by Yugoslav soldiers on April 3rd, resulting in 11 dead. Overall, this would be regarded as one of the first steps to what would be the start of the Yugoslav wars. Following the end of the protest, in July 1981, the Macedonian parliament slightly changed the schooling of the Albanian regions. Now they started to promote the Macedonian language and history. For the next 7 years, not much would happen, other than some Albanian schools were closed and some Macedonian politicians accused Albanians of forming anti-Macedonian groups. And this is where the conflict begins. Starting in early 1988, over 100 Albanian members of the Macedonian government were fired due to participating in Albanian nationalist events. Later that year, the Macedonian parliament passed a law preventing Albanians from buying property and prevented all those under the age of 15 from going to Islamic schools. All these laws gave the image that the Macedonian government was attempting to stop the growth of the Albanian population. And so in September 1988, the first mass protest started in the Albanian regions. The protest ended after a few days with over 150 people being arrested. During this period in Kosovo, there was a mass protest between the local Albanian authorities and Slavic Serbian politicians. Eventually, this resulted in a mass strike in February 1989, which then escalated to mass riots by May 1989. Soon after this, nationalist movements arose across all of Yugoslavia. And finally, for Macedonia, the constitution of the country defined the republic as a nation-state for the Macedonian people. By November 1990, Yugoslavia was now in complete freefall. The leaders of Slovenia, Croatia, and now Macedonia refused to take part in the Yugoslav parliament. Elections in Slovenia and Croatia made the republics officially not communist, though still for now in Yugoslavia. And so on November 15th, it was Macedonia's time to elect its future. However, no party won a majority, but technically the Nationalist Democratic Party, who I will refer to by its short name, the VMRO, got the most seats. Starting the next year, in March 1991, minor ethnic violence started between the Croats and the Serbs, and military training against a possible invasion started across all of Yugoslavia. Finally, on June 25, 1991, Croatia and Slovenia formally declared independence from Yugoslavia. Following this, the Yugoslav government called it illegal and invaded Slovenia. The Yugoslav army then fought a brief war and retreated out of Slovenia, which gave it full independence on July 7th. 1 month later, the Yugoslav army invaded Croatia over disputed ethnic land, and so the Yugoslav wars began. Macedonia, seeing the violence, attempted to call for the violence to end, but it continued on. So as the violence grew and grew, Macedonia now wanted completely out of Yugoslavia. As early as January 1991, the VMRO came up with a declaration of independence from Yugoslavia, but they didn't have a reason to separate, and so they kept it till September 8th. Then they held a referendum across the country asking if Macedonia should be independent. The main Albanian political parties in Macedonia, the Party for Democratic Prosperity and the People's Democratic Party, or for short the PDP, called on the Albanians to refuse to participate in the referendum. And so as a whole, the Albanian population refused to participate, and those who did vote voted against Macedonian independence. But as the Macedonians made up the majority of the population, Macedonia declared full independence from Yugoslavia on September 18th, 1991. Soon after independence, Macedonia had two main issues. One was the Greek naming dispute, which resulted in a massive embargo and little international recognition. And two, the ethnic Serbs in the republic held massive protests and threatened to separate, which started fears of war. All of these things made Macedonia one of the poorest states in Europe, but today we will only focus on the Albanian-Macedonian situation. In January 1992, the Albanian regions held a vote on having an autonomous Albanian region within Macedonia. The results are heavily debated, but as a result of it, the Macedonian government declared it legally void. The Albanians responded by holding a mass protest in the capital Skopje, which the Macedonian police responded by breaking it up. 10 months later, on November 6, 1992, the Macedonian police raided a smuggling operation on one of the biggest Albanian markets in Macedonia. It resulted in a confrontation that killed an Albanian teenager. Soon after this, a riot started in which the Macedonian police killed another 3 Albanians and a Macedonian. Immediately, mass protest and rioting spread across all of the Albanian regions, and the fear of civil war spread across the entire country. But the leader of the PDP, Matat Imini, prevented it by telling the Albanian population not to escalate, and so the crisis was averted for now. The main event of the next year was on November 10, 1993, when the leadership of the PDP and Albanian members of the government were arrested. The Macedonians arrested them because they found weapon stockpiles in Albanian villages. They would then accuse them of plotting a civil war, in which they would create an Albanian state called Ilirida. The PDP leadership would respond by saying it was a plot to keep the Albanians suppressed. However, the Macedonians released the leaders after a few months. Luckily for the Macedonian leadership, the PDP would fall apart into infighting, ending the main Albanian political front. Not much would happen for the next 4 years. Macedonia, starting in early 1994, finally got international recognition, and later that year it had its first election since independence. In these elections, the VMRO was defeated by a coalition of liberal parties, and in February 1995, an Albanian language school opened in Tetovo. As a result, the Macedonian police closed it, which caused a mass riot that killed 2 Albanians. Outside of Macedonia, at the end of 1995, the Croatian and Bosnian wars would end with over 100,000 dead. The brutality of these wars deeply scarred the politics and culture of former Yugoslavia. Finally, in 1997, our story returns. But first, we must understand the situation going on in Macedonia's Albanian neighbors. First, in Kosovo, an Albanian militia group called the Kosovo Liberation Army, who I will refer to as the KLA, launched an insurgency against the Serbian army and police. By 1997, the total dead so far was around 50, and overall the end goal of the KLA was to have Kosovo fully be separated from Serbia. And second, in Albania itself, the country fell into literal anarchy. This was because the country's entire economy was built on a scam, and so when the scam was revealed, the entire economy fell apart. The most important thing to note for our story is that weapon stockpiles across Albania were looted, and many of these weapons were given to the KLA and to groups of Albanians in Macedonia. With these 2 conflicts starting, the looming clouds of war returned once again for Macedonia, and war nearly came again on July 9, 1997, when the Macedonian police was ordered to take down Albanian flags outside the mayor's office in Tetovo. What resulted was the police arresting the mayor, leading to a riot that killed 4 Albanians and injured over 50. Soon after this, things turned even worse when the KLA bombed 2 Macedonian police stations in December 1997. However, 1998 was relatively peaceful for Macedonia. The only event that occurred was the election, where the VMRO would return to power. But outside of Macedonia, war would return to what remained of Yugoslavia, as now the Kosovo War began between the KLA and the Serbian army. The result of this would be many refugees from Kosovo fleeing to Macedonia, and as a result the dynamics shifted, and so did the beginning of a new level of tensions. On April 2, 1999, over 45,000 Albanians from Kosovo crossed the border into Macedonia. The next day, 65,000 Albanians arrived across the border. In the following months, nearly 300,000 Albanian refugees made it to Macedonia. For reference, they made up 12% of the entire population of the country. And so the Albanians, which before the war made up 22% of the country, now made up a little over a third of the population. The country, which already struggled financially, now had an economic crisis. Luckily for Macedonia, the United States and NATO stepped in and took care of the refugees, though Macedonia would still be in a bad place economically. On June 12th, the war in Kosovo officially ended with a NATO and Albanian victory. However, NATO forces would for now occupy Kosovo. Many of the refugees went back home, though 5% of them, around 25,000 people, stayed in Macedonia. Following the end of the war, the veterans of the conflict and radical Albanians in Macedonia founded the National Liberation Army, which for the rest of this video I will refer to as the NLA. Its leader was Ali Ahmeti, an Albanian from Macedonia who had fought in Kosovo since 1996. The goals of the NLA varied from member to member. Some wanted full independence and some wanted to join Kosovo, but all agreed that the Albanians in Macedonia needed to stop being seen as second-class citizens, and they all wanted an autonomous Albanian region. They launched their first attack on January 11, 2000, killing 3 Macedonian police officers. Shortly after this, the Macedonian police raided the village where the attack occurred, using tear gas, and during this, an Albanian was killed. 3 months later, the NLA would do multiple police station bombings. However, none would die during this. For the rest of 2000, not much would happen in Macedonia. However, in Serbia, the Albanian majority region of Preševo, an insurgency went on between Albanian rebels and the Serbian army. The conflict would spill over a bit into Macedonia, so the Macedonian army was sent to the border with Preševo and Kosovo. On January 22, 2001, another Macedonian police officer was killed in a raid near the Kosovo border. Following this, the NLA announced their intentions. The uniform of the Macedonian occupiers will be further attacked until the Albanian people are liberated. Macedonian policemen and soldiers are called upon to return to their families so that they do not give their lives in vain for the illusionary Macedonian plans for domination over the Albanian majority. Following this, another bombing would occur, except this one was on a commuter train. The final step for war would come on February 26, when at the border city of Tanošviši, a battle between Macedonian soldiers and the NLA began. The battle would go on for a week, with 4 Macedonian soldiers dying and at least 2 NLA soldiers dying. But most important about this was the kidnapping of a Macedonian TV crew by the NLA. Luckily, they were released shortly after, but this served as the point of no going back, and so the war had begun. On March 6, 2001, the Macedonian army mobilized. 10,000 soldiers were sent to the Albanian regions, and the Macedonian army quickly bought shipments of guns from Bulgaria and bought dozens of former Soviet aircraft from Ukraine. The NLA then mixed in with the Albanian population and smuggled as many weapons as possible from Kosovo. Both sides now were preparing for a full confrontation. NATO, which was in the middle between the two sides, attempted to ask for neither side to go on the offensive, but this was ignored. And finally, on March 14th, the NLA launched an offensive on Tetovo, and with that, the war finally came. The battle for Tetovo would rage on for months. It was an urban and guerrilla battle. Outside of the brutal battle for Tetovo, convoys of Macedonian troops were ambushed, resulting in some Macedonian convoys being completely destroyed, most notably at Vishis. By the end of April, the war was not pointing to one side or another. The Macedonians, after 2 weeks of fighting, captured most of Tetovo and the border areas on March 23rd. However, the NLA was still able to resupply and fell back to the northern hills. On May 4th, the NLA launched a new offensive on the Macedonian army, attacking the city of Kumanovo. 2 weeks of fierce fighting occurred in the villages around the northern side of the city, resulting with the NLA retreating on May 26. Soon after this, a brief ceasefire was put into place. This lasted 12 days till fighting resumed, now over the town of Aračinovo. The Battle of Aračinovo was another fierce urban battle, and eventually came to an end on June 25th, with NATO forcing a ceasefire. This ceasefire nearly lasted a month before the NLA launched a new offensive around the areas in Tetovo, restarting the conflict on July 22nd. The Macedonians now used their aircraft bought from Ukraine to full capacity against the NLA, to great effect. However, the Albanians ambushed numerous Macedonian convoys, which again, some of these convoys would be completely destroyed. Another ceasefire would be attempted by NATO 4 days later. However, this would end after another 4 days, this time by Macedonian forces. Peace by both sides was now looking like the only way forward. However, both sides had factions within them that was not interested in peace. Within the NLA, the radical Albanian National Army, who I will refer to as the ANA, refused any form of peace with the Macedonians. Within Macedonia, parliament members such as Stojan and Dov said that giving any territory to the quote-unquote terrorists would be shameful and humiliating. As the war went on, fears of ethnic cleansing, much like those in Bosnia and Kosovo, began. A taste of this was shown in early August when 10 Albanians were murdered by Macedonian police officers. Both sides' leaders now saw it in their best interest to end this war now, before it spirals into an even worse situation. So as both armies battled in Tetovo, across the country in Ohrid, peace negotiations began. The president of Macedonia, Boris Trajkovski, would have phone conversations with Ali Amiti, who was actually commanding troops at the same time. The mediator in the discussion was Albanian political party leaders. But finally, on August 8th, both sides agreed to a peace on the terms that Albanian be an official language of the country and more rights to ethnic Albanians. And so finally, on August 13, 2001, the Ohrid Framework Agreement was signed into action. The next day, NATO would start disarming of the NLA, and with that brought an end to the war. The cost of the war was devastating. 75 Macedonian soldiers were killed, and over 190 NLA soldiers were killed. But most importantly, 3 peacekeepers were killed and over 90 civilians were dead. The conflict killed 350 people and severely damaged numerous border cities. Both sides committed crimes. The Macedonians would arrest Albanians at random and shell civilian targets, while the NLA would reportedly bomb civilian targets and reportedly shut off water and power to a few villages. However, the conflict would still continue on, though much quieter. The The before mentioned ANA would kill 3 Macedonian soldiers in late 2001 and do numerous bombings on Macedonian barracks. They would attempt to kill Ali Amiti in 2002, which resulted in a mini civil war between the two Albanian groups. In 2007, the Macedonian army would kill 8 members of the group in a raid. And in 2012, the biggest fear of war would return to the region when mass protests between both sides started over the police killing of 2 Albanians. 7 would die during the protests, but the ANA would take it to the next level as they would kill 5 Macedonians in an attempt to restart the conflict. Luckily, the attempt failed, but in 2014 and 2015, the ANA would commit more attacks, eventually resulting in a brief battle in Kumanovo, killing 18. Since 2015, the region has seen peace, no major conflicts have happened, and finally, in 2020, Macedonia joined NATO. The question asked now is if war will return to this region, and the answer is most likely no. This conflict, and especially the Yugoslav wars as a whole, has scarred Macedonia and the entire region. It will take a lot down to bring the last 20 years of agreements and improving relations. Anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for 500 subscribers. It means the world to me. I can't even believe that, honestly. Like I said, with 100 subscribers, I can't believe that many people would listen to my voice. Now we got like 5 times that. So let's keep it up, I guess, you know? And I guess thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and bell, and leave a comment if you want anything else for a future video. Thank you and have a good day. Goodbye.